I've always had a fascination with signature moves in combat sports. Fighters who are just so good at a particular technique or combination of techniques that their careers have been tied intrinsically to these movements. In this video, I'm going to talk about some of my favorite signature moves throughout combat sports. This isn't a definitive list of the most effective signature moves or even the most iconic, although the techniques we're going to talk about are both of those things. But really, these are just a handful of techniques that have become intertwined with a particular fighter that has captured my imagination in one way or the other. So let's just jump straight into it. Let's start off this video with who might be my favorite fighter of all time, kickboxing legend Andy Hugue, who actually has two signature moves I want to talk about. The first one is the Hugue Tornado, which I feel is the forgotten stepchild of Hugue's signature moves, with his axe kick getting more love and attention, especially as of late. But the Hugue Tornado, or what would technically be described as a reverse spinning back low kick, is my personal favorite Hugue technique. The Hugue Tornado involved Andy baiting his opponent into throwing a sloppy front leg technique, and while they were off balance, he would spin forward and heel kick the upper thigh of the opponent's supporting leg. This technique is derived from spinning low sweep techniques of various styles of karate, particularly Kyokushin, which was Andy Hugue's foundational style. Arguably the most famous use of the Hugue Tornado was against Mike Bernardo in the K1 1996 World GP final, where he landed the technique on Bernardo's already injured leg to finish the fight in what might be the most iconic finish in K1 history. There is so much I love about the Hugue Tornado, and it ticks many of the boxes I look for in a quote-unquote signature move. It's unique and represents who Andy Hugue was as a fighter. It was effective, and of course it was flashy and fun to watch. Which does lead us into arguably what is considered Andy Hugue's signature move, which is of course his axe kick. Anyone who has ever attempted an axe kick statically will tell you that this is one of the most difficult techniques to even be able to physically do. The flexibility requirement is obvious, but you also need insane ligament strength and conditioning just to not rip your leg apart on the downswing. Axe kicks are extremely rare in any combat sport aside from, say, Taekwondo, because A, as we mentioned, next to no one can even physically do it, and B, the risk to reward ratio is not exactly favourable. But Andy would reduce this risk by launching the technique at range and stepping through, performing the kick with what was initially his back leg. This allowed Hugue to generate more momentum through the kick, of course generating more power, but also meant that his back leg is at a distance from his opponent, meaning he can slide away from any counters if necessary. Why I love Hugue's axe kick is relatively simple. It's one of the very few axe kicks that was actually practical and is really a testament to the physical abilities and fighting style of the Swiss kickboxing legend. There are actually quite a few fighters who are known for a particular submission in MMA. Ovin St. Preux von Flucho comes to mind, but I don't think any signature submission in MMA has been as tied to a fighter as closely as Cody McKenzie's guillotine choke. I feel like Cody McKenzie is a name that has been lost with time in modern MMA, but out of Cody's 17 wins in MMA, only 3 wins weren't a guillotine. Yes, you heard that correctly. Out of his 17 professional MMA wins, Cody McKenzie has won 13 fights via a guillotine, including a 10-fight guillotine streak. McKenzie's guillotine is a slight variation of the traditional guillotine, with his shoulder angled off slightly before the arch, and combined with McKenzie's catalogue of various grip variations, it made this guillotine an absolutely brutal submission that could be caught from almost any position. The Carlin Lift is one of those signature moves that is so impressive that it transcended the relatively niche sport of Greco-Roman wrestling. The Carlin Lift is a reverse body lift, a technique that especially during that time was predominantly seen in smaller weight classes because it involved literally picking up your opponent from a lying flat dead weight position, spinning them mid-air and then slamming them into the floor. At any weight class, this technique requires freak strength in like every muscle group. But to do this at heavyweight and super heavyweight against the absolute best in those divisions requires a biological anomaly that defies all logic on human limitations. The Carlin Lift not only helped Carlin on his way to becoming arguably the greatest Greco-Roman wrestler of all time, but helped create this almost folklore and mystique around Carlin that transcended Greco-Roman wrestling and made him an icon of wrestling and Russian sports. Mirko Cro Cop's left leg is probably the most well known in combat sport, and is tied to one of the most iconic combat sports commentary lines of all time: right leg hospital, left leg cemetery. Cro Cop's high kick differed from a majority of high kicks you would see in MMA and continue to see in MMA, which is more of a Muay Thai style roundhouse. Cro Cop's high kick more so resembles a karate style high kick, chambering his kick for longer into the motion of the kick and then extending the kick only at the last moment for that whipping effect. This style of high kick has the advantage of being extremely hard to read and extremely quick. The only issue is that it requires an absolute freak of nature in terms of flexibility and pure strength to pull off consistently, which is why you rarely see it in modern MMA, and even those who do use it can rarely generate enough power to finish their opponent in one shot. Cro Cop is a legend, and his left high kick will live in kickboxing and MMA history forever. Coming off talking about a legendary left high kick, it's only fair that we talk about my favourite right high kick, which has to be from one of the greatest kickboxers of all time, Peter Aerts. Peter Aerts' high kick is one of the strangest signature moves in combat sports, because if you were to teach someone how to throw a high kick almost in any style, it will never end up looking like the Dutch lumberjacks. But this sort of awkward, technically wrong in a textbook sense high kick is probably the most efficient and effective high kick kickboxing has ever seen. Aerts did two things that made this kick so effective. One is he would often mask the kick with his right hand and then follow through with the kick. This would mean if done correctly, his opponent wouldn't see the kick until it was too late. Important because the kick itself was anything but quick. And if he wasn't masking it with his hands, he would throw it offbeat, usually on clinch breaks, which again hid this kick until it was too late for his opponent to react. Because of how well he hid this kick, Aerts was able to throw it in a wider, less textbook fashion, but this allowed him to generate an unreal amount of power. When the lumberjack landed that high kick, heavyweights would truly tumble like logs. We are going to finish this mini kicking section of this video with Robert Whittaker's blitzing 1-2 high kick, a combination that is so simple, so common across traditional martial arts that it's almost baffling that we don't see it more in MMA. The philosophy behind this combo is simple. The 1 establishes the distance, the 2 master the high kick, which finishes the combination. Robert Whittaker has become a master of this combination and will often use a blitz alongside that 1 to great effect, essentially allowing him to cover nearly half the cage with this combo if he wants to. But with this blitz comes the inherent risk of the opponent angling off, and Whittaker has addressed this by simply increasing the circularity of the kick, often catching his opponent as they dip to the side to avoid the blitz. Such a beautiful and effective combination that would fit many other fighters' styles in MMA, but hasn't received widespread adoption. If you were to be a bit more rigid in the definition of signature move, legendary judoka Masahiko Kimura's signature move probably actually isn't the Ude Garami named after him in the West. It would be a simple Osotogari, which according to legend, Kimura would practice the elements of this technique on trees as it was too physically devastating for his training partners. However, it's this double wristlock that has gained his name, that although not his signature move in terms of which technique he used to become a judo legend, it was the use of this technique in his legendary match against Helio Gracie that forever changed combat sports. This match between Kimura and Gracie is an extremely important point in the history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, exposing the many flaws and forcing BJJ to evolve, eventuating into becoming the foundational martial art for modern MMA. The Kimura as a technique was quite a small part of this story relatively, but the brutality, strength and optics of the technique became symbolic for Masahiko Kimura as a martial artist. The Kimura, as we call it, or the Ude Garami for its full Christian name, is one of the oldest techniques in judo, and it just highlights how important Masahiko Kimura is to combat sports that a technique with that history would be colloquially named after him. In a video with all these legendary techniques that require technical brilliance, I find it funny that all it took to get onto my favorite signature moves list is some crazy Thai dude that is just really good at taking a punch. There have been many fighters in every striking combat sport that can enter tank mode and is just really good at taking a punch. And this is always awesome, and usually makes the fighter must-watch television. But I do struggle to think of a fighter that has made their ability to take a punch not only an integral part of their fighting style, but how they are marketed and presented to the audience. Rodtang walking down his opponent with his hands by his waist, eating shots like they are cornflakes, really awakens that just bleed Neanderthal inside of me, and although it's kinda ridiculous, the spectacle is never not awesome. And it's not just a gimmick, his chin has helped him become one of Muay Thai's biggest stars. Dominick Cruz's footwork to this day is the most innovative leap by an individual fighter I think I've ever seen in MMA. Cruz's footwork, according to him, came from having to spar with much bigger guys compared to him during the early days of MMA. Cruz, being a smaller guy, couldn't handle the power of the larger guys, so he would have to be constantly moving to not only avoid eating shots, but to force his opponent to throw from an off-balance position as he dances around them. Cruz's footwork is an amalgamation of every footwork technique blended across boxing, wrestling, even American kickboxing, into an almost awkward but hypnotic dance-like motion. Shuffle steps, back pedals, corner cuts, even blitzes, air for 5 rounds straight. This type of movement required a ridiculous level of cardio and has some glaring weaknesses that would be exposed later in his career. Thus, it's unlikely that we will ever see this exact formula of footwork in high-level MMA again. But Cruz's footwork was a facet to his game that would take him to the absolute pinnacle of the sport and highlighted the importance of innovation and footwork in this crazy new sport. To finish this video off, I'm going to do a quickfire round on some of my favorite combat sports signature moves. Peter Graham's Rolling Thunder knockout of Badr Hari is probably my favorite knockout of all time, and it'll be really hard to talk about the Rolling Thunder without first mentioning Peter Graham. GSP's Superman punch / jab is so underrated in how impressive it is. A Superman punch of any variety is such a high risk low reward technique, and comparing it to just a normal punch, it leaves you much more open to a counter. If you miss, you are completely out of position, and you have to commit to this technique 100%. GSP's unreal timing and setups made this technique so effective for him, and the Superman punch more or less disappearing from high-level MMA recently highlights just how difficult it is to pull off effectively consistently. Masakazu Imanari being relegated to just the Imanari roll guy is so sad. This guy is nothing short of a legend in both Japanese MMA and grappling, but the Imanari roll is just one of those techniques that is not only aesthetically flashy, but for Imanari was quite a high percentage technique and would take him straight into a 411 leg lock position where Imanari could often end the fight or match. There was a lot of beauty and intricacy in the innovation with the Imanari roll we just talked about, but sometimes the answer to a problem is much more simple. Kazushi Sakuraba is a legendary grappler, one of the greatest of all time in MMA. He was technically brilliant, don't get it twisted, but the fact that such an important part of his arsenal, especially over his legendary battles with the Gracies, was simply to just jump over the guard and punch a dude is never not funny to me. Kickboxing legend Remy Bonyarsky was so synonymous with flying attacks that he was literally given the nickname of the Flying Gentleman. What made Remy's flying attacks so successful was the combination, of course, between perfect technique and timing, but also just raw explosivity, which meant he could seemingly soar across the ring like a Dutch eagle hunting its heavyweight prey, but also gave him the ability to just launch a flying attack from crazy positions. Truly a one-of-a-kind type fighter and one of the best we'll ever see in kickboxing. So there we have it, those are a few of my favorite signature moves throughout combat sports. As you can tell, MMA and kickboxing are my preferred combat sports, so we are missing sports like boxing and through the range of traditional martial arts. But that doesn't mean there aren't some cool signature moves in those sports, just not my favorites. Feel free to leave your favorites in the comments section below. I want to thank everyone who made it to the end of this video. As always, your support means the world. I'll see you in the next video.